Okay, so, you've sent in some really, really fascinating stuff this time about Kinshasa.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to unpack, as always. But what really jumps out right away are these two big kind of intertwined stories. One is these absolutely devastating floods that just hit the city.
Right.
And then the other is, the sort of renewed attention around the Bukanga Lonzo legal proceedings. So I think for our deep dive today, we're really trying to go, beyond just the headlines.
Absolutely.
We really want to understand like the immediate impact of these floods, but also, how this Bukanga Lonzo case, it really gives us this like crucial window into these bigger issues of governance and accountability
Totally.
within DRC.
Yeah. And what's so fascinating when you look at them together is how they both kind of highlight some of these core challenges, facing the country.
Yeah.
You have this sudden dramatic, natural disaster, and then the sort of long-running saga around how public resources are managed.
Yeah.
And I think taking them both together gives us, a much richer
absolutely.
and more nuanced perspective
definitely.
than just looking at each of them individually.
Okay, so let's dive into these floods first.
Okay.
It sounds like around April 4th and 5th of this year, Kinshasa just got hit incredibly hard.
Yeah.
What exactly happened? I mean, what was the trigger for this?
So the immediate cause was a period of, just really intense rainfall.
Wow.
Just sustained rainfall that led to the Njili River bursting its banks.
Oh, wow.
And, unfortunately, these kinds of extreme weather events are becoming more frequent globally.
Yeah.
And the impact on a city like Kinshasa with its existing infrastructure challenges was particularly severe.
Yeah, I mean, and the human cost, it sounds just immense.
Yeah.
The initial reports were already, really alarming, but then the numbers just kept going up.
Yeah.
What's the latest in terms of casualties and just that immediate impact on the population?
So tragically, those initial reports of 22 deaths climbed to 33.
Wow.
And then in later updates, we saw that figure even reach 43.
Oh, my gosh.
And then beyond that, just heartbreaking loss of life.
Right.
Numerous people, around 40, according to one of the sources, required hospitalization.
Wow.
And then, incredibly, over 2,000 people were displaced from their homes.
Oh, my God.
Suddenly needing emergency shelter.
Yeah.
So it really brings home the scale of this disaster when you think about, that many people without a roof over their heads.
Absolutely. It's just devastating. And it wasn't just people's homes that were affected, right? I mean, I remember reading about significant damage to, like, key infrastructure as well.
That's right. The disruption extended to really essential services.
Right.
So the supply of potable water to almost 14 of Kinshasa's communes was severely impacted because of damage to the Njili River water intake station.
Right.
So that's, a massive portion of the city suddenly facing this clean water crisis.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, National Road number 1.
Right.
That's the vital artery connecting Matadi and Kinshasa. Was almost completely cut off.
Wow.
So you can imagine the, significant problems for transportation. And just the flow of goods.
Yeah, the ripple effects are just enormous.
Absolutely.
So what was the immediate response to all this? I mean, it sounds like the various different actors stepped in.
Yeah, we saw responses at a couple different levels.
Okay.
So politically, Augustin MATATA PONYO, who's a member of parliament and former prime minister, he initiated what's known as a question orale avec débat, which is a formal mechanism in parliament where a member can actually directly question a government minister and trigger a debate on a particular issue. In this case, it was directed at Prime Minister JUDITH SUMINWA. Really focusing on the consequences of the floods, especially this water supply disruption, and demanding sustainable solutions for the future. And what's so interesting is that, this political maneuver, the timing of it, given Mr. Ponyo's own legal challenges that we'll talk about later, raises questions about, was this political opportunism? Or was this genuine concern for the affected population? Which is, a dynamic we often see in countries grappling with transparency.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a legitimate need for answers.
Absolutely.
But then there's this whole other political context.
Right.
So what about the government's direct actions to help people?
So the government did mobilize to distribute essential goods. Things like food hygiene products. And they established temporary shelter for the thousands who were displaced. We saw the Stade Tata Raphael and the Stade des Martyrs being used as these emergency shelters.
Wow.
Which really illustrates just the sheer number of people who lost their homes. The Minister of Social Affairs, Nathalie Aziza-Munana, also announced additional measures. Including things like rental guarantees for displaced families, suggesting that there is this understanding that temporary shelter is just, the first step in a longer recovery process. And the governor of Kinshasa, Daniel Bumba, was very visible inspecting these shelter centers. So we're seeing that local level involvement in the response.
So there are a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it also looks like the political response is continuing. I mean, there's this pretty significant meeting planned in the National Assembly, right?
Yes. An extraordinary plenary session of the National Assembly is scheduled for April 16th. And the specific purpose is to evaluate the government's handling of this flood disaster. So this really indicates a serious level of scrutiny. And a desire to understand how effectively this crisis was managed. And what improvements, might be needed for the future.
So it's not just pointing fingers. It's like, okay, what can we do better?
Exactly.
What about, the crucial work of actually restoring those essential services? I mean, like getting that water supply back up and running.
So the Regideso, which is the state-owned water utility, has been working to, repair the damaged infrastructure. Restore the potable water network in Kinshasa and the Congo Central region. They've also issued appeals to the public for patience. As these, complex repairs are undertaken. Getting that clean water flowing again is absolutely vital.
Oh, for sure.
For the health and the daily lives of so many people.
Absolutely. It's a huge undertaking. And it wasn't just official organizations that were responding, right?
That's right.
I mean, the materials also mentioned that there was, a pretty prominent religious figure that got involved as well.
Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo, who is the Archbishop of Kinshasa. He actually made a point of visiting the Ndanu neighborhood, which was particularly hard hit by the flooding, just to, express his solidarity with the residents there. So this really powerful gesture, highlighting that, important role that religious leaders and institutions often play in, providing comfort and support during these times of crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if we take a step back and look at, kind of the overall picture of this flood disaster, what would you say are the key takeaways for us?
So the immediate and I think, most stark takeaway is the sheer scale of devastation. And the really profound human cost. The tragic loss of life, thousands of people displaced, the disruption of these essential services. But I think beyond that immediate impact, this event really throws a spotlight on the vulnerability of Kinshasa's infrastructure when it's faced with extreme weather. And it raises some really urgent questions about the need for, more effective preventative measures, smarter urban planning that takes these risks into account, and the development of more resilient infrastructure to actually be able to withstand future disasters.
It's not just about cleaning up afterwards. It's about how do we build a city that can weather these kinds of storms in the future.
If we consider for a moment how the alleged mismanagement of funds in a project like Bukanga Lonzo might have diverted resources that could have been invested in that more resilient infrastructure, that leaves Kinshasa more vulnerable to the effects of the flooding. And it highlights this, potential systemic link between governance failures and, how natural disasters actually play out.
That's a really good point. Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about this Bukanga Lonzo trial. This has been kind of a major case.
For quite some time now. So what's the latest on that front?
So Bukanga Lonzo has been, a really major legal and political saga in DRC. At its heart are these allegations of, really significant misappropriation of public funds connected to this large agro-industrial project. And the central figures include former Prime Minister Augustin "MATATA Ponyo. The same individual we were just talking about, along with two other defendants.
And it seems like the legal proceedings are moving forward again.
Right.
After some delays previously.
Yeah, the Constitutional Court has officially scheduled the next hearing for Monday, April 14th.
Okay.
So that signifies a resumption of trial after some interruptions in the proceedings.
Okay. What were the reasons for those previous delays?
Yeah.
I mean, I vaguely remember reading about some legal maneuvering going on.
There have been a few factors contributing to the pauses.
So in this most recent instance, lawyers representing the defense sought an adjournment of the March 3rd hearing, arguing that they hadn't received proper formal notification.
Okay.
However, the court rejected this argument, pointing to what they considered inconsistencies within the defense's request.
Okay.
But then, more broadly, the trial had been temporarily suspended for a period that coincided with the election season, during which one of the defendants was actually a candidate for the presidency.
Wow.
So you can see how there are these layers of legal and political considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely complicated. And this case, you know, it's often framed as being like really significant for DRC.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Bukanga Lonzo is widely viewed as, you know, a key test in the fight against corruption in the DRC.
Right.
It brings to the forefront these fundamental questions
Yeah.
about transparency and the responsible management of public funds. And so allegations of misuse of funds on a project of this scale, you know, naturally generate a lot of public interest and scrutiny. Because it speaks directly to how the country's resources are being used for development and for the benefit of its citizens.
And it is really striking that, you know, the same Augustin MATATA Ponyo, who's now so vocal about the government's accountability in the face of these floods, is also like a central figure in this trial about alleged financial mismanagement. So, I mean, does that juxtaposition tell us anything important?
I think what's particularly revealing is precisely this intersection of these events and these individuals. And it highlights that really complex and sometimes paradoxical nature of political landscapes, where individuals can simultaneously be, you know, voices demanding accountability in one context, while also facing scrutiny regarding their own actions in another. And I think if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really underscores the ongoing need for strong, independent institutions and a robust legal framework to ensure accountability across the board.
Yeah, and for, you know, our listeners following these kind of intertwined developments, I mean, it really does give you like a much deeper understanding of the challenges of establishing and maintaining good governance within, you know, a nation that's dealing with both these immediate crises and also these long-standing issues around financial management.
Exactly.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it really is.
So, okay, we have this like immediate and devastating crisis with the floods in Kinshasa. And we have this sort of ongoing and politically charged legal battle with the Bukanga Lonzo trial, which really touches on, you know, these much broader questions about how the country is run. So how do these two like seemingly distinct situations actually connect?
At the heart of it, I think the connection lies in these underlying challenges of governance and resource management in the DRC. So, you know, the floods really illustrate the vulnerabilities in the infrastructure and this critical need for effective disaster preparedness and response, which in turn requires the efficient and responsible allocation and utilization of public resources. The Bukanga Lonzo case directly addresses that management of those public funds and the accountability of those in positions of power. So both events, you know, in their own distinct ways, underscore the fundamental importance of sound governance in ensuring the safety, well-being, and overall development of the population. And so I think, you know, understanding these interconnected issues offers a far more complete and insightful picture of the current realities in Kinshasa than if you were just following one of these stories.
It absolutely is. It's so much more nuanced, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so to kind of sum up our deep dive here, the key takeaways for you listening are, you know, we've got these immediate and tragic consequences of the flooding. And then we've got these continued legal proceedings in the Bukanga Lonzo case, which raises, you know, just crucial questions about accountability and how public resources are being managed.
Yeah, and you know, this leads to this really important question for all of you to ponder. How do societies navigate this immense challenge of trying to address immediate humanitarian crises, like the devastating floods we saw in Kinshasa, with that often longer term and more complex pursuit of accountability and justice, like we see exemplified in the Bukanga Lonzo trial? You know, what valuable lessons might we glean from Kinshasa's current experience as they try to manage these parallel and interconnected challenges? You know, and think about the role of resilient infrastructure and robust legal and governance frameworks in building a more secure and just future for all citizens.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
A lot to think about there.
A lot to think about.
As always.
As always.